everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Elevate with C&M Coaching. My name's Maggie. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I was not here last week. I was on a very much needed vacation with my family, and I had a great time. So thanks for your patience in waiting for another podcast. This week, there is something very important that I want to talk about. I had a conversation the other day, and it led me to write down the topic I'm going to address today, which is weak collection notes. So, those of you who work at a buy here, pay here dealership or work in any sort of collections department, you know that the notes are one of the most important parts of your job aside from collecting the actual cash. So, let's talk about this for a second. Most of the time, when you're working in a collections department, you're not by yourself. You're going to have coworkers, and as a team, you're collectively responsible for collecting obviously the payments from your customers, whether that be that you have your own queue or you all work on one queue together. There's more than one of you most of the time. And of course, it's possible that a customer could call in and speak to someone other than the designated account rep if you work your own queues. So, notes are obviously going to be critical. Now, one of the things that we see happen typically is if notes are not entered properly, this can cause a lot of miscommunication. On the other side of that, too vague of notes can also be an issue as well. So let's talk about the first one, not entering notes properly. So if you are a dealership or a collections department that does payment arrangements or promise to pays, it's very important that you document every single detail that you have from your conversation with the customer so that you can make sure that anybody else who touches that account knows exactly what happened based on nothing but being able to read your notes. Now, this is going to be super important if you're doing some sort of an arrangement. If your customer owes you $500 and they're paying $250 today and $250 next week, you need to put that in the notes because anybody contacting that customer via an outbound phone call is going to need to know that information, especially if you're doing any sort of hold on the account or setting up some sort of agreement where the customer is going to be paying somewhere down the road. The last thing you need is to look disorganized. Why? Because this decreases the credibility of the collections department. We need to have good, clear communication so that the customer understands that there is only one path here, right? Otherwise, they're going to use this knowledge to pin collectors against each other, or if you're not recording your phone calls, claim that one collector said something versus another collector, and maybe they're going to make up some sort of an arrangement that occurred. And if you don't have your calls recorded, it's going to be your word against them and two different collectors' words against one customer, and you're going to have to make a decision there that's going to be difficult on who you're going to believe. So good note taking is going to be critical. If you're doing payment arrangements, make sure you're documenting why the customer missed the payment amounts they're going to be making, the dates they're coming out, what their typical paycheck might look like, of course, why they missed this payment, if they intend to have a more regular schedule moving forward. Think about the things that you would want to know if you didn't hear that conversation firsthand, because that's what everybody else needs to know. Now, on the flip side of that, if you have loose notes or notes that are just missing significant details like left message or spoke to customer and agreed to payment arrangement, but there's no details on what those arrangements might be, this is also going to create a problem. The last thing that you want is direct miscommunications between collectors, particularly during inbound and outbound conversations. Because if a customer calls up and says, hey, I spoke to Susie last week and she agreed that I could only pay $50 today and I could pay the rest next week when I get paid, but you see no notes in the system, you can't just believe the customer. We have a process to follow. We are responsible for collecting that full payment. They have a vehicle they're driving around in that they're supposed to be paying for. You can't just go based on their word. There needs to be notes in the system. If you're recording your phone calls, it's really easy for you to get access to that audio file and listen back to the conversation so that you can get everything cleared and squared away. But again, I revert back to the same comment as before. This creates a breakdown in your collections department and in the communication, and customers see this as weaknesses. I don't think anyone wants their collections department being viewed as weak by a customer. So it's very important that we take good notes when we're on the phone with the customer. In addition to that, I also see issues where non-customers are calling to make payments for customers. And of course, we want to take the payment, right? But we also need to make sure that we're still verifying the account correctly. This is going to be trying to find some information that the person making the payment knows about the customer so that we can ensure that we have the payment processed to the proper account. And unfortunately, a lot of times you're going to see situations where you've got customers with similar names or similar spellings. And so it's important to verify address or even phone number. Hopefully, the person calling to make the payment on someone else's behalf knows the phone number of the person whose payment they're making on their behalf, right? So we need to verify some information to make sure we have that, but then good notes should be put in the system. Spoke to Bill Smith's mother, Mary. She authorized us to process a payment in the amount of $250 using her Visa on August 12th, 2022. Even things like updating addresses or offering auto pay, put the information into the system. August of 2022, customer updated address, new address on file. Or, something along the lines of new job started August 1st, customer emailing over new pay stubs to update their payment dates. Anything along those lines that is going to be imperative to the account needs to be in there. You always want to think of this as a literal record. So, just like you have a medical record that documents your blood work and your blood pressure and your weight, collections is very similar in the way that if you can go back to that information, you may need it at some point in time. And hindsight is 2020, so you never know what information might be viable down the road. So you're better off keeping track of things and having it there in case you need it. That's why I don't delete any emails ever when I have 6,000 in my inbox. But good note taking allows you the ability to go and look through the records and figure out when addresses were changed, who spoke to the customer. You want to know that the accounts were properly verified. If we're changing addresses, we want to know when those addresses were changed. It's not just changing it in the system, but keep documentation of that, especially new job changes or even life changes. Now, your system might automatically keep track of when an address was changed and also might keep track of a previous address, which is great, but it's also a really good idea to document life changes. Marriages, divorces, birth of children. This is information that will be beneficial at some point down the road to have. And the last thing that you want is some sort of domestic situation where a couple gets divorced and perhaps the husband's information is on the account, but the collector doesn't know that they're divorced. And all of a sudden we're reading addresses off in the system, and now we just gave the ex-husband the new address for where his ex-wife is living. That stuff is dangerous. So you need to be very careful. So this isn't just about protecting you, but it's also about protecting your clients as well. So the moral of the story here is take good notes, not just for collections departments, but also for sales departments as well. I can't tell you how many times we've done a mystery shop and then cross-checked that mystery shop call notes with what actually happened in the conversation and how often they are drastically different. Something might be marked as a hot lead, but all they did was leave us a message. Or I've even seen situations where they mark us as not interested, but they never actually picked up the phone to call us. So you're going to want to be cross-checking those notes with your call tracking softwares to verify that, hey, I listened to this phone call, it doesn't match the notes. This is stuff that people don't typically think about, but specifically collections, it's going to be important. Sales is important, but not nearly as important as collections, especially when you have multiple people taking payments and hearing different things about customers from the customer. You need to keep that information documented in the system so that everybody can be on the same page. As I said before, we don't want any fractures in our collections departments, so please, those of you who are working in collections departments, be very careful about your notes. Keep good notes, write things down while you're on the phone, and then add them to the system later to make sure everybody's on the same page. Because remember, we need a very structured and strong collections department. He said, she said is never fun, but it's particularly worse when there is money involved. So take good notes, keep your notes in the system. That's the end of my rant for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. Let me know if you guys are interested in our hosted chat. Remember, we do offer that. You can go to chat-more.com for more information, or you can call us at 877-900-9461 if you have any call training questions for me, or you are interested in call training yourself, or a mystery shop, or even collections training. But take those notes. Keep good notes. We'll be back next week. Thanks again so much for joining us here at Elevate with C&M Coaching. I hope everyone has a great weekend.